Here we go, Deuteronomy chapter 31. Now, there is some interesting things going on in this chapter. This is kind of Moses' sign off. A new leader is being commissioned in Joshua. And then we have this really interesting part where God predicts Israel's failure, their unfaithfulness, how they are going to prostitute themselves to the other nations. And then Moses is instructed to write down the law that he gives to two groups. He gives it to the Levitical priests and he gives it to the elders of the people. The elders are going to read the law to the people every 7 years during the festival of booths. And the Levitical priests are going to put the law, the written law, in the tabernacle next to the Ark of the Covenant so that it can be witnessed against Israel in their unfaithfulness. Now, let's just talk for a moment about what it is Moses is writing down here. Is what he's writing down in Deuteronomy chapter 31, is that actually what we have in Deuteronomy? Is that the book of Deuteronomy? Well, the answer is it is probably partially the book of Deuteronomy, except that there are all of these bits in Deuteronomy, as we pointed out before, that are they don't come from the hands of Moses, and they are later reflections on what Moses is saying. Like, for example, the reflection on his death that comes in chapter 34. There are other bits as well throughout the book, but what we have here, what Moses is writing here, is often called Proto-Deuteronomy, because this was kind of the first writings that would eventually become Deuteronomy and perhaps the whole Torah. And so Moses, finally in this chapter, we're told that he composes a song. We're going to talk about that song in next week's video. But let's take a moment today to reflect on what God says about Israel's predictable failure. So God says to Moses in verse 16, "You are going to rest with your ancestors, and these people will soon prostitute themselves to the foreign gods of the land they are entering. They will forsake me and break the covenant I made with them. And in that day, I will become angry with them and forsake them. I will hide my face from them, and they will be destroyed. Many disasters and calamities will come on them. And in that day, they will ask, 'Have not the disasters come on us because our God is not with us?' And I will certainly hide my face in that day, because of all their wickedness in turning to other gods." It's pretty intense. And then actually a little bit later, Moses picks it up again and he tells them in verse 27, "For I know how rebellious and stiff-necked you are. If you've been rebellious against the Lord while I'm still alive and with you, how much more will you rebel after I die? Assemble before me all the elders of your tribes and all your officials, so I can speak these words in their hearing and call the heavens and the earth to testify against them. For I know that after my death you are sure to become utterly corrupt and to turn from the way that I have commanded you. In days to come disaster will fall on you because you will do evil in the sight of the Lord and arouse his anger by what your hands have made." So there are these predictions that Israel is going to not be faithful to the covenant. They are going to fail to do everything that Moses has instructed them to do, that God has instructed them to do in the law. But then what's remarkable in this chapter is that these predictions come alongside God's promise to give them the land, to bring them into it and to deliver it to them. You notice that be strong and courageous. Your God is going ahead of you. Joshua will go ahead of you. I will be with you, God says. And he's going to be with them in the process. God does all of this knowing that Israel is going to disobey him. God's faithfulness to his covenant purposes for Israel are maintained in spite of his knowledge of Israel's future covenant unfaithfulness. This is remarkable. Even the promises of God's presence with Israel. He says, "I myself will be with you" in verse 23. It's set alongside the expectation that sin will entail God's absence. Like in verse 17, he says, "I will hide my face from them." Now, this paints a really vivid picture, and it's actually a picture that's similar to what happened when Moses was up in Sinai on the mountain and the people were down below worshipping false idols. God is up there telling Moses how he should build the tabernacle so that God can live with them. And while he is doing that, the people are down in the valley worshipping the golden calf. It's a stark picture, but that's the same picture we get here. In the end, Moses' witness is to remind Israel of the basic truth that we have seen all through the Torah, which is God is faithful even in the clear face of unfaithfulness. And then the song that Moses will teach them will communicate this again in more detail. But just in closing today, I want to have a look at something I mentioned earlier. So Moses says that the Torah should be read by the elders of Israel every 7 years during the Feast of Booths. Now, this is a tradition that has developed over the years, and it's now become a party that's called Simkhat Torah, which means the joy of the Torah. So today, Jewish synagogues, they have this ritual or habit of reading through the Torah, either once every year or once every 3 years. And at the end of that time, when they get to the end of the Torah, when they get to Deuteronomy chapter 34, they throw a massive celebration. And so there are singing and dancing, and usually what happens is they have these scrolls of the Torah. Have a look. I'll put some pictures up for you to look at. This is what Simkhat Torah looks like. And as we come to the end of our 2-year journey through the Torah on Tuesdays, and if you've been tuning in every day of the week, then you've made this 2-year journey all the way through the Old Testament, the whole Hebrew Bible. I think it is worth celebrating, I'm not going to jump the gun because we haven't got there yet, but it is worth reflecting back on the God that we have encountered. On Tuesdays, we have encountered him in these 5 books of the Torah, and it is worth having a bit of a song and a dance about it. The joy of the Torah is not just something that is for Jewish people, because this is our God too. And we know him personally through Jesus, the Messiah. So often Christians are afraid of the Old Testament, or they won't venture into the Old Testament because they find it backwards and they find it difficult. But in light of all that we have seen and all that we have dealt with as we've looked through the Torah, and we've come across some of the most difficult things in the whole Bible. In light of all of those things, I feel that what I have seen is that God is good. He is powerful. And as it reminded us in Exodus, he is compassionate and gracious, slow to anger and abounding in love and faithfulness, maintaining love to thousands and forgiving wickedness, rebellion, and sin. And yet, he does not leave the guilty unpunished. And so we have so much to rejoice in. This is our God. He is the God of the Israelites, and he is the God of the nations as well, as we've seen so many times along the way. So what I invite you to do as we come to the end of this part of the Bible over the coming weeks is to Simkhat Torah, to joy, to relish, to celebrate what we have heard about in these books.